Have you ever discovered something about your family that could completely change your life? Imagine finding an ancient ring, buried in the past, that carries not only a noble legacy, but also conditions that defy everything you believe. Isabella Montero received a mission from her grandmother in her last moments to unearth a secret. But what seemed like just a family mystery led her to an impossible choice: accept the rules of an elitist world or fight for her freedom. How far would you go to honor the past without losing who you are? Discover now a story of courage, love, and redemption. Isabella, listen. Donna Cecilia's voice sounded fragile, as if each word required an immense effort. There is something you need to know. Isabella held her grandmother's hand tightly, as if she could stop her from leaving. What is it, Grandma? Please rest. You need to recover. Cecilia shook her head, a slight smile touching her pale lips. There is no time, my girl. In your grandfather's tomb, there is something that belongs to you. Promise you'll go there. But what is it? Isabella asked while tears filled her eyes. Just promise. The grandmother took a deep breath, weakness taking over her body. This will change your life. Before Isabella could say anything else, Cecilia's breathing stopped, leaving a devastating silence in the room. The day of the burial was gloomy, with heavy clouds covering the sky. Isabella stood next to her grandmother's grave, watching the coffin slowly descend. The words said by Cecilia never left her head. That night, the promise made to her grandmother didn't let her sleep. Taking courage, she decided to go to the cemetery, even though she knew how scary it would be. With a flashlight in hand and a small shovel, Isabella crossed the rusty gate that creaked in the wind. The air was heavy, and the sounds of dry leaves being dragged along the ground added to his apprehension. Each step seemed to echo in the darkness as she headed towards her grandfather's tomb. "What do you think you're doing?" The sudden voice made Isabella let out a choked scream. She turned quickly, shining her flashlight on the face of a tall, serious-looking man. He wore simple clothes and held a shovel larger than hers. I... He tried to respond, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. "This is no place for nocturnal visits," he said, without looking away. "Who are you?" "My name is Isabella Montero. I need to do something at my grandfather's tomb," he replied, his voice trembling. The man frowned. "That sounds wrong on so many levels, girl. I am Arthur, the undertaker. If you want to dig a tomb, you better have a good reason." Isabella took a deep breath, trying to explain. "My grandmother made me promise before she died. She said there's something important there, something I need to find." Arthur watched her for a long moment, before letting out a resigned sigh. "Okay, but I'll help. I don't want you to mess with something you shouldn't." Reluctantly, Isabella accepted the help. Together, they began to dig in the damp, hardened earth. The work was heavy, and the silence between them was only interrupted by the sound of the shovel meeting the soil. Why are you so determined?" asked Arthur after a while. "My grandmother said it was important. I don't know what I'll find, but I trust her." Arthur shook his head, as if pondering something. "I hope you're prepared for whatever it may be. Sometimes unearthing the past is more difficult than we imagine." Finally, after much effort, Arthur's shovel hit something solid. He carefully cleared away the dirt, revealing a small wooden chest. Isabella took it with trembling hands, her breathing quickened with anxiety. "Open it," said Arthur, watching curiously. With a click, the lock gave way, and Isabella opened the trunk. Inside, a golden ring rested on an old cloth. There was an almost faded inscription engraved on the inside. "What does that mean?" Isabella asked, more to herself. Arthur leaned in to get a closer look. "It looks like an old inscription. But whatever this is, there's a story you don't know yet." Isabella held the ring tightly, feeling its weight. "My grandmother said it would change my life. I need to find out why." Isabella and Arthur walked in silence along the dusty road that led to the city. The ring, now kept in Isabella's pocket, seemed to weigh more with each step. "Do you have any idea where to start?" asked Arthur, finally breaking the silence. "My grandmother mentioned an antique dealer. Dr. Vinicius. I think he can help." Arthur shook his head thoughtfully. "I've heard of him. He is a man who knows more stories than an old book." When they arrived at the antique shop, the place looked as old as the objects it contained. The sound of bells announced their entrance, and a short man with white hair and thick glasses appeared from behind the counter. "Can I help?" he asked in a deep, drawling voice. "I'm Isabella Montero," she said, trying to sound confident. "My grandmother left me this ring, and I think it has something special." Vinicius took the ring carefully, examining it under the light of a yellowish lamp. "Interesting. Very interesting. This is no ordinary ring." Isabella and Arthur exchanged curious looks. "What do you mean?" Isabella asked. "This ring belonged to a noble lineage," explained Vinicius, pointing to the inscription. "Virtus et honor hereditas." Virtue and honor are the inheritance. It is a typical inscription of families who rigorously protected their legacy. Isabella felt a shiver. "My family was poor. How could this have reached us?" Vinicius smiled slightly. "Sometimes the stories we are told are only part of the truth. This ring is not here by chance. It carries more than a symbol. It represents a right." "Right to what?" asked Arthur, frowning. "To a legacy," replied Vinicius, looking at Isabella seriously. "But there are conditions. If you want to claim it, you will need to follow the rules imposed by that lineage." Isabella remained silent, absorbing the information. Vinicius continued. "These noble families guarded their wealth and privileges with strict rules. This ring is like a key, but opening the door may require more than you imagine." Arthur leaned forward. "What if she doesn't want to open that door?" "Then the ring loses its meaning," said Vinicius with a shrug. "But if you decide to move forward, you will need to accept the conditions imposed by this lineage." Isabella felt overwhelmed. "What conditions?" "You'll find out if you decide to explore further. The next step would be to present the ring to someone in that family or people connected to it. They will know what to do." Arthur placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" She sighed. "I don't know. My grandmother told me it would change my life, but I don't know if I'm ready for what comes with it." "The question is not whether you are ready, but what you are willing to sacrifice to discover the truth," said Vinicius as he returned the ring. The drive back to the cemetery was silent, except for the sound of leaves being blown away by the wind. Arthur finally broke the silence. "You know, your grandmother must have had a good reason for wanting you to find this. Maybe she believed you could handle what's coming." Isabella looked at him, thinking about Vinicius's words. "What if the price is more than I can afford?" Arthur stopped and turned to her. "So you decide what's worth more, the legacy that's hidden in that ring, or the life you already have?" Isabella nodded slowly. "Deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore what I had found. I needed answers, even if they came at a high cost." "Are you sure this is a good idea?" asked Arthur, watching Isabella adjust the ring on her finger as they walked towards the entrance to the great hall. "No, but I don't see any other way to get answers," Isabella replied, her voice full of tension. The grand affair was grand, with lights shining on an imposing marble facade and ornate columns. Luxury cars stopped at the entrance, while elegantly dressed men and women paraded with the confidence of those who knew their place there. Arthur stopped before crossing the threshold. "Isabella, remember, no matter what they say, you are not less, because you do not belong to this world." She took a deep breath and nodded, squeezing the ring on her finger as if drawing strength from it. Inside the hall, chandeliers hung like stars, reflecting off the polished surfaces. Murmurs stopped when Isabella entered, the eyes of several guests falling on her. A woman with a haughty posture and a crimson velvet dress approached with firm steps. She looked directly at the ring on Isabella's finger and raised her eyebrows. "This ring is authentic." His voice sounded like a mixture of surprise and authority. "My name is Adelaide Vasconcelos. And you?" "Isabella Montero," he replied, trying to remain calm. "This ring belonged to my grandfather." Adelaide narrowed her eyes. "So you are a descendant. This changes a lot of things, but of course there are rules to validate your position." Isabella felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "What rules?" Adelaide gestured for him to follow her. He took her to a table where a burly man, in formal attire and with a serious expression, was waiting. He barely looked at Isabella before speaking. "Your lineage will be confirmed by documents and records, but this is not enough. To be accepted, you must follow our traditions." "What traditions?" Isabella asked, trying to hide her nervousness. Adelaide replied, her voice as hard as stone. "Marry someone from our circle. This is how we protect our legacy. Your grandfather knew this, and now it's your turn." Arthur, who had been silent until then, stepped forward. "That's not fair. You can't impose something like that." Adelaide ignored him, keeping her eyes fixed on Isabella. "This is the only way to claim what is rightfully yours. If you are not willing, the ring will be just a worthless object." Isabella looked at Arthur, who shook his head, clearly indignant. "Don't make any decisions now," he whispered. That night, after leaving the hall, Isabella sat on a bench outside, the cool night air enveloping her. Arthur sat next to him, crossing his arms as he looked up at the stars. "This is too much for you to bear," he said, his voice soft. "They want to turn you into something you are not." "What if that's what my grandmother wanted?" Isabella asked, her voice choked. "What if she knew I could handle it?" "Sometimes the desires of those we love are not easy to understand," replied Arthur. "But in the end, the choice is yours." Isabella looked at the ring, lost in thought. "My grandmother told me it would change my life, but maybe it's not the change I expected." Arthur leaned towards him. "You don't have to accept their conditions. You can create your own path, Isabella. Don't let them define who you are." The silence that followed was heavy, but full of meaning. Isabella knew she needed to make a decision, and quickly. The ring glowed softly on her hand, as if waiting for her choice. Isabella took a deep breath as she entered the room again, this time with firm steps. The ring was still on her finger, but its meaning had completely changed in her mind. Adelaide was waiting for her in the center of the room, surrounded by curious looks. "So have you decided to accept the conditions?" Adelaide asked, her voice icy. Isabella stood before her, her eyes burning with determination. "No, I will not accept your conditions." Silence fell over the hall, like a wave that submerged all sounds. Adelaide narrowed her eyes, shocked. "Do you understand what you're saying? To renounce this is to renounce your place in this world." Isabella raised her head. "My place is not determined by a ring or its rules. My grandmother left me this to choose my destiny, and I choose to be free." Murmurs began to spread throughout the room, but Isabella continued. "This ring may be a key to your world, but I don't want to live under the conditions it imposes. My value is not in belonging to a lineage or in marrying someone I don't love. My value is in who I am." Arthur, who was at a distance, watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety. He knew Isabella was giving up something big, but he also knew it was the right decision for her. Adelaide took a step forward, her gaze stern. "You are making a mistake. Your grandmother would have expected more from you." Isabella felt the words like a stab, but she didn't flinch. "My grandmother believed in me. She knew I would have the courage to do what is right, even if it meant rejecting everything you offer." She slipped the ring off her finger and held it up, letting the light reflect off its surface. "This ring does not define who I am. I return you to your world because my freedom is worth more than any legacy." When Isabella reached out to hand over the ring, Arthur crossed the room, his expression determined. "Wait!" he exclaimed, his voice resonating in the room. All eyes turned to him as he approached Isabella. "Don't give up on it like that. There is another way." Isabella looked at him, surprised. Another way? Arthur took a deep breath, as if he was about to reveal a long-kept secret. "I also belong to a noble lineage. I gave up my title when I was younger because, like you, I didn't want to live up to other people's expectations." The murmurs in the hall increased, and Adelaide looked completely astonished. "But I never imagined I would meet someone like you," continued Arthur, his eyes fixed on Isabella's. "Someone who would make me believe that it is possible to honor the past without giving up the present." He took a simple but incredibly beautiful ring from his pocket and knelt down in front of Isabella. "Marry me, Isabella, not for legacy, but for love. We can create a new path, one that respects who we are and what we value." Isabella felt tears run down her face as everyone in the room waited for her answer. For a moment, everything disappeared. The hall, the people, the traditions. There were only her and Arthur left. With a smile, Isabella took Arthur's ring and placed it on her finger. "Yes, Arthur, I don't want a legacy. I want a future with you." The hall erupted in murmurs, but Isabella paid no attention. She had made her choice, and for the first time in days, she felt light. Adelaide, defeated, turned her back and left. The golden ring, now forgotten, remained on the table, a symbol of a world that Isabella had left behind. Arthur held her hand, and together they left the room, ready to create a new story.